The Baron is the first Tier 13 Conqueror, and it can be pretty strong if you build it correctly. Hey everyone, Derpy here, and welcome back to another Battle Pirates video. As we get started, I do want to remind you that all my builds are available in the builds document, which is made possible by my channel members. That will include the picture, a little bit of description, as well as the hash code, which you can paste into the share feature right here to get all the ship designs directly in your shipyard. If you like the work that I'm doing and want to consider supporting, click the join button below the YouTube video. With that said, let's go ahead and jump into the video. The first thing that you'll notice is that this ship has 22 million armor points. That's because of a recent stat compression, which I'm sure you all know about because it pretty much messed up bounty completely, and this means that armor points are now worth 265 times as they were before. So just consider that when comparing it to your older tier 12 hulls, which will have somewhere in the range of 10 million armor points as opposed to, 200 billion or whatever the number was. In any case, this is a really strong hull. The overall defenses are pretty solid. Ballistic defense is pretty high, penetrative defense and stuff like that is a little bit lower here. We're going to work on improving those when we get to the armor. Penetrative defense, radioactive defense are the two low ones, but we do have other things we can start to improve on as well. With the actual weapons for this ship, there is going to be really just one choice. You're going to want to put on the one that came out with the ship, the Sigil Cannon. Unfortunately, Kixeye doesn't really give any secondary options because everything is hull locked these days right here. And of course, we do have the Savior Heavy Cannon at U1 as well, which is automatically granted with the ship. It is likely, in my opinion, that Kixeye releases some changes to this heavy weapon or otherwise for the hull when it does get the U1 upgrade, which is probably going to be about 6 months or so away. There is another important thing to note on this hull right here, which is the special ability, where if this thing stays still for 6 seconds, it gets a burst of speed similar to one of the Salt hulls, the Sovereign, that we had pretty recently. Just wanted to point that out there as combat speed being something important. But let's go ahead and jump into the specials. The first thing you're going to want to do is click, pick the engine that you want to use. Now there's really just one choice, and that is the Conqueror engine that boosts the ballistic damage, which is the turbocharged engine C. You might be using this as well as on your defenders, so it might be worth taking it off your pit bulls. Although interestingly, I think pit bulls are a good way to stop the ship from doing a lot of damage to you, especially when someone goes with a more building damage heavy variant and not a ship damage variant. So that's the first choice, is the engine. Next up, we're just going to put on a bunch of specials to boost things like Conqueror damage, ballistic range, ballistic damage, stuff like that. The first one is going to be a Conquest Battery 2. This one is pretty solid, gives you plus 110% building damage, and it does improve bonus combat speed a little bit, which is why I'm choosing this one over looking at something like one of the regular ballistic batteries, although you can't really find one that works well for the ship in any case. Conqueror Battery 1 or Conquest Battery 1 would be the alternate in this version right here that's non-limited, but of course the Conquest Battery 2 is the best option for that. You also want to make sure you are using Invasion Scanner 3, which I just so happen to be out of these on my ships, or in my count. This is a really powerful special, it gives you a bunch of extra damage, which is really nice. And if you don't have any of these like I do, you might want to consider scrapping some of your tier 11 ships, or at least refitting it off, which should be instant, but does require a shipyard to be free, and that will get you this special right here. I don't know if we're going to get an Invasion Scanner 4 in the tier 13.5. It's very possible, but the jury is still out on that one. Next up, we're going to go for our ballistic range special, which is probably at the point where you start to pick what you want to do and how you want to change your build around, because there are a bunch of different options out there. Now, the thing that I think I'm leaning towards right now is the Nuclear Accelerators 2. This gives you, and you can kind of ignore the ballistic accuracy because it's only helpful against enemy ships, which are not doing the most damage in any case. And you can also pretty much ignore it completely. I won't get into the mechanics of how it works, but these weapons are splash weapons. You can see right here it has a splash of 6, which is pretty low, but it does still exist. So that is something to be aware of. These are splash cannons and are not necessarily accuracy based. In any case, accuracy doesn't help against buildings. So our ballistic range is what we were considering, and we have a few choices. We know that range, of course, is going to be the same for every single one of these specials. And there's nothing much we can do about that, but we can compare accuracy, splash, and damage. Nuclear Accelerators 2 has 40% splash, but it does also give you a combat speed bonus, which I think is pretty nice. I think this hull needs it, and I think it does work well or synergizes well with the built-in ability. You could also look at, say, the augmented ballistic armament right here, or the streamlined barrel loaders, and these have different options. You could go for a reload heavy special right here, reload heavy build. I don't think that's going to be the best there. The plus 80% reload is pretty small, especially compared to what we're later going to get from Autoloaders 3. The augmented ballistic armament right here gives you 45% splash instead of 40, so that is something to consider with that. It is going to be slightly higher splash, but I still think Nuclear Accelerators 2 beats out either of these two specials. The one that you would want to consider putting on instead is actually Cannon System 5, although I will note that the weapon weight is also lower with Cannon System 5. It has the same range, of course, has no accuracy because that's not how these ballistic specials were designed, but it gives you a plus 50% ballistic damage, which is really nice. So you do want to consider this one as an option. You could drop down to Cannon System 4 if you wanted, although again, there's no good reason to. Maybe less weapon weight. Actually, it has more weapon weight. It's a little bit confusing. In any case, you're deciding between making your ship fast and having a medium amount of damage, or the regular speed and having a high increase to your damage. I'll let you make that decision for yourself there. Just know that those are the two specials you're wanting to pick between. I'm going to go for Nuclear Accelerators 2 for this build. Now for the next two specials, you're going to want to do things to help increase the ballistic damage and reload and a bunch of other stuff like that. Now the standard one you go for is the Ballistic Calibrator right here. This gives you 70% damage. Projectile speed doesn't mean a whole lot. Maybe against moving ships it will help out with the cannons. Not a big deal though. Again, the accuracy doesn't do much. There's the plus 70% damage. You could also look at the drum reloaders, which gives you a lower amount of damage, 37%. I bet it might even be, 37%, and then gives you some reload. So that's a choice right there. You're comparing these to the ballistic calibrators versus the drum reloaders. I think that pure damage is better than reload because it means that initial strike against the gate, against the ship, against something else like that is much more powerful. So ballistic calibrator is probably the way to go. Quick note here, if we jump onto nuclear accelerators and we look at our ballistic range special again, I do want to check that Cannon System 5 can still be put on, and it looks like it cannot. So it's going to be a little bit of a conflict right there. You're not going to be able to put on ballistic calibrators and Cannon System 5, which is another reason in my mind for using the nuclear accelerators instead. It means you can put on a slightly better ballistic damage special. Now, there's a few things you want to play around with as well in your own shipyard and take a look at that. For the last special, you do have a few different options. You could do something to increase splash, something like Combustion System 2, which we are, interestingly enough, using on our garrison ships at the same time. That's going to help increase splash and make your cannons work just a little bit better. I don't quite think that's the way to go, though, because people aren't going to be putting things close together where they can very easily be splashed out. So instead, I'm going to go for a ballistic reload special. You might think that to find the best ballistic reload special, you should go over to the limited and search for ballistic reload and see that, yeah, there's obviously nothing here that you can still put on. Go to Blueprint and search that as well and find the best one and see that it's going to be Autoloaders 4. Well, if you remember really far back, Autoloaders 3 is a researchable special, and because 3 is less than 4, 4 should be better than 3. Unfortunately, you would be wrong here because the Autoloaders 4 gives you a plus 66.6%, whereas the regular research one gives you plus 136%. A little bit confusing, but that is something to be aware of. So there are the specials that I'm intending on building at least my first 3 Barons with, because the Barons are currently limited to an equip cap, or build cap, an own cap rather, of 3. I did check, and this puts the minimum reload of your weapon down to just over 0.4 seconds between shots there, which is above the 0.2, so nothing too much to worry about there. I was wondering if we would hit minimum reload. Looks like we have not in this case. Now again, there are a few other things you want to consider. You could take a look at the ballistic range special and see if there's any sort of differences, any changes that you can make. to that one right here with everything else equipped. You could drop over to augmented ballistic armament if you wanted to and get slightly higher splash but lose the combat speed. You could change some of these specials to just Desolation Warheads even, or something else that has an insanely high splash value, but it would involve removing a bunch of other stuff right there. In general, the way I have this ship built is extremely powerful against enemy gates and enemy buildings, enemy warehouses, enemy turrets. I will note that I'm currently recording this in very late January of 2024, and we are expecting a building pack to drop in February, early February, just in time for Valentine's Day. You can load up on your wife's credit card and build all those buildings, new outposts, new gates, etc. So do keep that in mind here. And this is actually going to be a pretty weak hull against ships. I did talk a little bit about the defenses and stuff like that. If we drop down to the defense stat, 70% is pretty high against ballistic, but I still think that pit bulls are one of the best ships at stopping this particular hull because it does such low damage to ships. Although we will have to play around with that, and if you guys really like, I could try and make a how to defend against the Baron and sort of a strategy guide for how to defend and attack with this ship. The one thing I haven't really addressed so far is the armor. In terms of armor, you're going to want to use a lot of whatever people are attacking you with. If their base has a bunch of missiles in it right here, you're probably going to want to equip penetrative missiles or penetrative defense, although missiles are not the strongest thing in the current meta. If they have a bunch of Armageddon scatterguns, for instance, you're going to want to equip corrosive. If they have a bunch of dread husks, you're going to want to equip some explosive. I think that explosive is likely the biggest threat for this hull, especially if you don't put on the high combat speed like I have, so do consider different armors if you change around your combat speed specials. I think that explosive is probably the way to go on this one, although you would not go wrong with putting on 1 corrosive, maybe even 2 corrosive for all these scatterguns people are going to have in their bases. I don't really think ballistic is going to be particularly needed because we're already at 70% ballistic defense right here. A few other things to consider for the ship might even be something like Agility System 4 for the evade and the tactical field resistance, although I don't really like using that in today's game. So there's my thought on the Baron build. Note that it is luckily underweight, although if you build 5 of these without upgrading your dock, you might have some weight issues, I'm assuming because that happens pretty much every tier. Let me know what you think, and I will get back to you in the comment sections if you have any questions or comments on this build. I want to give a huge thank you to everyone whose names appears on the end screen now. These channel members are helping keep the channel possible and running. Click the join button below the YouTube video if you want yours added as well. And until next time, this is going to be Derpy signing out, helping you be a better pirate.